Cyber Resiliency and Orchestrated Disaster Recovery as a Service. This is a sponsored vBrownBag podcast brought to you by Pure Storage. And today we are going to be talking with Suresh and Lance about DRaaS and all the things. We have a fantastic co-host presenter panel with Alistair Cook and Damian Carlson, old friends of the show, folks that haven't been here in a little bit. So welcome, gentlemen.
Chris, thank you again. I'm doing pretty well. Excited to be talking about this long title that we have in the slide here.
All right. Lance, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. Good to be on the show with my fellow tall presenters and co-hosts. So welcome. Welcome the opportunity to speak.
That is an excellent segue. So without further ado, why don't we get into it? This is something that is top of mind for a lot of us. So let's kick this thing off.
All right, great. Again, the whole idea here is to keep it interactive. So please feel free to pause me at any point in time. With that said, in all caps, if somebody's listening in audio, they can't see the slide. It's bright orange with all caps and says disaster recovery on it. So let's get right into it. I don't need to say this to anybody in this audience here or those who will be listening. Disaster recovery is not a new problem. It's been around forever. IT practitioners like all of us have known what this is all about. It's something that people have tried to address in different ways for their specific business over a period of years, decades, right? So the first thing we want to establish here with Pure Storage coming into this space is that we do understand that this is not a new space where we are, that we're trying to solve a problem in. Having said that, while it is a relatively old space, there have been changes, as you can imagine, of what disasters really mean in this era and time that we live in, right? Typically, it's a disaster recovery is all about natural disasters. You lose some array, you lose your networking connection, something that prevents the folks in a business to be able to access the applications they care about for business continuity purposes. And that's what business disaster recovery in the past has always been thought of as. But in recent times, as we all have been hearing in the media around malware and ransomware, those events are more and more prevalent. More and more businesses are affected by it. Ransomware as a service was a buzz phrase floating around in the internet, for the past few months. And it really has an impact for businesses, right? Is that, yes, you can protect at your boundary, but if there's a compromise to your infrastructure, to your data, how sure are you that you are able to recover your applications in a way that your business can continue operations, right? That are critical IT infrastructure that you're running all your applications in, at what level is it infected, and how do you kind of get back to a place where things are good to be able to continue operations, right? That's been something that a lot of people have been thinking about more and more. Hence the title of this entire presentation, where it's a cyber resiliency and disaster recovery, right? So while it's DR that we're talking about, this is kind of crept into it as a real issue that customers are facing. So they also look at disaster recovery solutions, including ours, which is Pure Storage's offering here, Pure Protect, for both those purposes, right? If things fail hard, how do you bring up your applications where you can work? And if they fail in a different way, how can you recover from certain points in time that makes sense for the business to operate again, right? So just want to establish that up front.
And I think that's a really important differentiation, that historically we thought of disaster recovery as being natural disasters primarily. And we saw some of that shift towards recognizing that the real disasters are the humans.
Yeah.
And then over the last couple of years, the statistics have been that most DR failovers are now about recovery from ransomware. And so having that awareness of where the real threats are is important.
Exactly. And the other thing I'd add to that, Alistair, is that, as you know, around disaster recovery, it's also about testing, about how often are you're able to test your environment. And as all of us know, you may have a plan in place, you may have a run book, but it's typically there's a lot of dust on top of that run book because people don't execute disaster recoveries often. And the reason that they don't do that is because exactly for the same reason. You've set up all this infrastructure for specific for DR, but many of the customers actually use that infrastructure just for DR? No, they actually spent the money, so they're going to use it for other things as well. So now when it comes time to disaster, do they have the capacity, right? Do they have the resource and the ability to spin up the workloads that they wanted to in that site? I mean, those are just some of the traditional challenges around this space, right? And that's why disaster recovery...
If you haven't run your DR test, you don't know how it's going to fail.
Exactly. It's like
it's going to fail.
Yeah, it's like LTO tape drives, right? You ship it off to Iron Mountain, and now how much of that's going to be going to recover, even if they send it back in the truck, right? So there are a lot of these traditional issues around that, and recovery is the key thing. I mean, it's clearly in the title, disaster recovery, right? So the focus should be recovery, and as Pure Storage, we are trying to address that, right, in a meaningful way over a period of time. And this is the introduction, in this product to start to do that. The second important thing that I want to address up front again is, I mentioned, right, people know what disaster recovery typically is. And even to this day, while we have, clouds everywhere and nowhere at the same time in many of the businesses, and when you ask somebody about disaster recovery, they go back to what they think disaster recovery is, right? It's really a project. It's something where I have to have a big investment, a capital investment, so that I can create a separate site where I have to think about everything from staffing and licensing, and the facilities and operations, doing all of that type of stuff, just so that you could online an environment in the case that something bad happens, right? There's a disaster. And at the end of the day, all of us know, right, deep down, that disaster recovery is an insurance policy use case, right? That's really what it is. It's what happens if. But at the same time, when it comes down to the spending of the money for what happens if, that's quite a bit of a pinch for a lot of the businesses, right? And obviously there are going to be critical businesses with infrastructure for, let's say, the financial services, where they have real-time trading information, things like that. And for them, disaster recovery is a completely different thing, right? For them, a lot of it is all around HA and availability. But exactly like we spoke about with regards to ransomware, well, HA is going to replicate that too, right? What is your strategy, right? If you still have HA, but then you still want to recover applications from a certain point in time, right? So that's why it becomes interesting, and a place for, or an opportunity, I would say, for us to disrupt in this space. So this slide, I think, really captures exactly where Pure Protect disaster recovery is, and I'll explain this for any of the audience who is listening in and not seeing slides. But the reason I talk about this slide in particular is because we talk to customers all the time, and this resonates directly with them. And why? Why does it resonate with them, right? Because this slide, it really talks about a strategy around data resiliency, right? And I think this is the place where we are at right now in this market. In 2024, this is where we are, right? Is that there have been storage platforms and storage systems from a bunch of different vendors, including Pure, that offer, instant snapshot capability at the volume level. If you have a lot of applications sitting on volumes presented from different LUNs in different storage groups, you can create protection groups and take snapshots of them. So that gives you that instant level, volume level recovery, right? That's a local recovery aspect. And most of the vendors in the space offer some level of that. At least the competitive ones do. The second tier in the data resiliency strategy is all around HA and high availability, right? Now, this is where you at the storage level, we can talk about storage level replication, and Pure, as a storage company, has something called Active DR, an active cluster that I'm sure you're familiar with, that allows somebody to replicate their volumes from one array to another, even if they're geographically separated, right? And that's available to them. On the software stack layer, there are some companies like Zerto, which operate in the DR space, and they offer HBR, host-based replication, which allow you to do that at the ESX or host level, right? So host-to-host level replication. That's also available in that arena. And again, if your data is infected with malware, whatever else, it's too bad, because that's going to get replicated as well. then all of us know about the backup space, the data protection world, right? It's pretty busy, I would say, in terms of all the vendors who play in that space. It's a mature market, a large market. And in that market, you have obviously the vendors like Veeam, Commvault, and others, and Cohesity in the more recent, time frame from an appliance point of view, offering secondary data management from a backup, point of view, right? And that's available as well. And Pure has partnerships with all the big players there. And the last piece in this data resilience strategy is what we're really covering today, right? That's really around the idea that you can orchestrate the recovery of your applications. Right now, how is this any different than what Pure does today? Well, the big differentiator here is that when an end user, right, when a customer, an end user looks at what they think about in terms of recovering, their lens is through the application. And the application lives in one of three places, right? It lives in a virtual machine, it lives in a SaaS portal somewhere for whatever app that they're using, or it lives in some kind of container which is serving up the app. That's kind of the modern application landscape, the hybrid landscape that we live in today, right? And so when somebody looks at disaster recovery there, when we talk about virtual machines, if a customer has a VM environment, let's say with 500 virtual machines or 1,000 virtual machines, will they want to protect all 1,000 of them for disaster recovery? The answer is squarely no, right? Because that a VM environment is a mix of templates, it's a mix of dev test systems, and a bunch of things that they do not care about for disaster recovery. They have tier one applications, they have application sets and groups with databases and ERP or CRM applications, things that collectively need to work together. And those are domain controllers and network virtual machines, things like that, right? Those are critical infrastructure. Those are critical applications. And those are the applications where the customer is really going to want to have a DR strategy for. And so the first thing that we're doing in Pure with Pure Protect is to elevate from being just in the storage layer to now being in the VM layer, right? We had a recent announcement of block and then file. And similar to that, now we're going from volume to VM, right? And so the first thing to take away here is that Pure Protect offers a full end-to-end application-focused or virtual machine-focused protection and recovery, right, as part of this DR strategy. So that's the first important thing to take away here. So let's dig right into some of the details here. Now, how is this any different? How is this managed? How does the user interact with this? The first thing to say is that Pure Protect lives as a SaaS is a SaaS offering. So anyone who has access to Pure One today can access Pure Protect Disaster Recovery as a Service. If a customer does not have access to Pure One, because number one, they don't use it for some purpose, they're not a Pure customer, not a problem. The best part about our solution here is that, and I'll get into this a bit later, our software stack for Pure Protect lives in the virtual environment. So if a customer does not run Pure Storage arrays, FA, FB, any of that infrastructure in their on-premise environment, this product still works, right? It's VM-centric. It's able to talk at the hypervisor layer in VMware, and that's its connective tissue. We are storage agnostic, right? So they can operate and manage virtual machine level protection and recovery with Pure One managed through our web portal as a SaaS offering, and they do not need to have Pure. Alistair, you may have had a question here.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight that because that was something that was really important as I was looking at this. Your deployment actually on premises and the protected location is software only. There's no dependency on having a particular storage array. So this could work with other vendors' storage. It could work with vSAN-based storage as well.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Whatever's being presented to a hypervisor.
That's exactly right. And the next follow-on question could be why, right? Shouldn't you be integrating with Pure Storage as well? And here's the answer to it. Number one, yes, we will be, right? We will be presenting it. We will be integrating this with Pure Storage as well. But that is more of an efficiency mechanism for us as Pure Storage to be able to decide what SLAs do customers need and at what level of integration should this product be functioning at to provide that SLA, right? So you can imagine when a customer wants to protect virtual machines at a VM layer, and that has its pros and cons, they can, without having to worry about it, manage the same policies in this SaaS offering through Pure Protect. And then the system is going to be sophisticated enough to understand, number one, do they have a Pure Array underneath? Number two, do they have the SLAs, or what are the SLAs they care about when protecting these applications? And should I use FA Assist, for example, to do it? Versus should I be using the VMware level to do it, right? Now, again, I also want to talk about what we have now, because I know that's really what this presentation is about. So I won't veer too much into the future, but as of right now, goes back to the idea that it's storage agnostic. Another second important reason, if you again start with what does the customer want, what's the customer business value, right? Today, if you look at how customers deploy Pure and what they use for Pure versus other storage appliances out there, as we all know, you have QLC flash, you have spinning disk, spinning rust in some cases, right? I mean, in terms of what the speeds are and the latencies are that you require. And in many cases, customers don't necessarily deploy tier 1 storage for backups, right? Let's be very clear about that. The Synology is quite popular for tier 3 type of storage. A lot of backups for deep retention happen to be on that. That's kind of the type of storage people typically use. So for us, being storage agnostic is an advantage for exactly the same reason, Alistair, that you brought up, which is we can work with any storage that's presented to the VM layer, right? And again, we are doing this for disaster recovery. So again, this is early innings for what we're trying to do, but we want to start correctly, right? And obviously, when I get into the architecture, we can talk a little bit more about how we plan to, what's the strategy around that overall. But again, we'll talk about more of the product as of right now.
Hey, Suresh, I have a quick question before we move forward.
Yeah.
So these policies that you're showing here on the screen, I see gold, silver, and bronze policies. Mm-hmm. Are these policies that are defined through Pure Protect, or are they taking advantage of like VMware SPBM or something along those lines?
Yeah, currently they are through Pure Protect.
Okay.
Right? And I'll go through the details of what each of those mean and from the Pure Protect point of view. But currently it is a Pure Protect policy.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Yep. So I talked about this already, so I'm not going to belabor this point, but we are storage agnostic. And I did mention that we do use VADP as a protocol of choice in order to take snapshots of virtual machines in that environment. If other products like Veeam and others are in a customer's environment and they're using it for backup, not an issue. We work side by side with any other product that does backups. This is focused on disaster recovery as a service. Now, another important aspect of here, and this I'll talk to you about, is I think very important again from a Pure messaging point of view, right? Pure as a company has always been known about simplicity, and that's something that customers love about Pure as a company with the products that they release, and we don't want that to change with this offering for Pure Protect. Now, typically, again, if we look at how customers think about the cloud in general in the market today, there are typically a couple of objections that they bring up most of the time, right? The first objection is, okay, the cloud is extremely complex. I don't know how many, it's like AWS has a service almost, coming out every single day, it feels like, right? They have so many different services now, right? It started with S3 back in the day, but it's not the same anymore, right? So they have over 170, different services. And each of them have a specific purpose. So really the way to look at the cloud, whether it's Azure, GCP, or AWS, is that they have a bunch of different tools, and then you can go use those different tools and put it all together, and you can build a Toyota, or you can go build a Ferrari, right? It's really up to you. And so the way we looked at the cloud, and from this offering in Pure Protect, is that we don't want to make the cloud a chore for the customer, to have to learn, to build, to put things together, to have a pre-setup before they come to this product, etc. Right? So really the idea here is that a customer can bring their cloud account, in this case, in our version for Pure Protect, it's AWS, to this product. If a customer does not have an AWS account, they can sign up for one through a partner. We can help them through alliances, etc., to get an AWS account. And that's all they need. They don't need to do anything else except have an account. What we actually do in our product is when they have that account, we give them a CloudFormation template that essentially helps them build out the entire DR network in the cloud automatically in about 10 to 15 minutes flat, right? And that's end to end. So they don't need to know the difference between an IGW and a VGW and a transit gateway and an EC2 instance and a subnet or a security group. No, it's completely abstracted out. What we are really doing is letting the customer bring their cloud to the Pure Protect platform, and our software is responsible for setting up the entire DR network, the entire all the policies, all the access rules, everything else in a well-architected way, as AWS would want you to do that, right? And that's something that we do out of the gate. So the deployment experience for us is really half an hour experience. So a customer can go from being not having a DR in their environment to being DR ready in 30 minutes or less, right? And that's the experience I think that a lot of businesses are looking for. Again, it depends which business. There are details there. Chris, I think
okay.
You have. Yeah.
I have several thousand questions around this one right here.
Let's start from the top.
But I don't want to. So if I ask questions and slides in the future are going to cover them, just say, well, we're going to get into that. So feel free to punt. The customer already has an AWS environment stood up. You're saying that you come to them with a CFT of their existing environment or a CFT of a templated DR environment that they are. So the CFT spins up a new environment that is a mirror of their previous environment for disaster recovery purposes?
No. So this is what I'm trying to say here is that if a customer has an AWS account that they've been using for any other purpose, you can just bring that account to us. For example, they may be using it for for some kind of application development, whatever else, right? That's just an account, right? Now, within the account, they have access to all the different regions in AWS, all of that type of stuff, right? What our software does is we give them a CFT. They pick a region that they want their DR site to be built in, and then once they execute that CFT, it sets up a bunch of different policies with that CFT. And at the end of that execution, what they end up with is an actual full-blown DR site, end to end.
Okay, so it's... I'm sorry.
It's a new VPC that's going to take the place of whatever their disaster protected on-premises environment is.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about any redirects from the outside for their application or any of the stuff to keep business continuity going. We're talking about we're saving your data, and you will then need to reroute IP addresses in DNS or something.
Yeah, so we'll get into that.
Okay.
So I will punt. I'll use your card to punt right now because we're going to get into
Fair enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so we'll talk about exactly what that deployment model looks like. I'm pretty sure it may even be the next slide.
Cool.
Let me go to the next slide. Yeah, it is the next slide. Fantastic. All right. So great. So let's talk about this picture here. So this is kind of a high level overview of the entire solution. But Chris, definitely would like, we can get into the weeds with all the networking stuff, which I do want to get into, right? Because it's an important aspect of it. Networking is never easy in any environment in my entire career. So we should definitely get into this and how we think about this, for the customer as well. So the top part of this picture. So this picture is kind of in three sections. There's a top part, and then there's a bottom left part and a bottom right part, right? The top part is really around the management layer, which I mentioned is inside Pure 1. As you can imagine, with any enterprise class product, we have role-based access control. So if you could be a DRaaS viewer versus a DRaaS operator, and a bunch of other different roles. So if somebody needs to press a button, which is if we want to keep it like a easy red button, but we definitely want to have a box over it so that anybody willingly can't go and press the button, right? So we have all of those type of capabilities right in Pure 1. The second thing I'll talk about is subscriptions. The way Pure Protect is consumed is based on the number of terabytes protected. And what does that really mean? It means that, as an example, if you have a VM, and I'll use one single VM example, it will be easier that way. If you have a single VM, it's got a 100 gig disk, and inside vCenter, it says that it's 50% used, then that 50 gigs of that 100 gig disk is what we would charge for protection. Now, you could protect that as much time as you like. You could have as many snapshots and retentions as you like. And we only still charge you for that logical size of the logical use size that we're protecting, right? So that's an important aspect of it. So now you have a dozen VMs, you have 100 VMs or 1,000 VMs. It's all based on the amount of storage that we are logically protecting. Now that's important from a subscription point of view. And again, since this is at the VM level, guess what? You can start small and you can grow. I mean, we like it as a business from a subscription point of view. The customers like it because it doesn't have to be all in, right? That's an important aspect here as well. Then the other thing that Pure Protect does is we connect to the edge. In our case, a piece of software in the form of a VM with the same services that Pure offers today. They have phone home services and edge management services, which securely connect our cloud to the edge. Today, it happens to be with FAFP, etc. And Pure Protect relies on the same infrastructure. So nothing new there for somebody who's already a Pure customer. And then we have alerts and notifications. So, this is a DR product. If something bad happens in the middle of the night, you may want an email or two to get sent to somebody to go take a look. And that's available as well. Again, this is a SaaS-based system. So, you have access to a browser. All of this can be set up from wherever you have that access. Now, the bottom left here is the representation of a customer's on-premise environment, in this case, VMware. And that's what our product supports today. So it kind of represents a few VMs, some ESXi hosts, some data stores in a cluster, etc. And there's something that we call the EA, an edge appliance. And now that edge appliance is a VM in the form of an OVA. You can download like any other VM, right? That all VM administrators are pretty used to doing. So you can just literally download that from our Pure One Manage interface. And once you power on that VM, it wakes up and phones home and connects up to the Pure One cloud. At that point, the connection has been established. And it allows now the cloud to communicate with that edge device for sending messages to do important things. And I'll talk about what those important things are. Now, what is that EA's responsibility? Now, the EA is responsible for a few functions. Number one, discovery, right? So you have VMs that live in a ESX cluster. They're on a bunch of different hosts. The environment may have DRS enabled. They may move around, their disks may be added and removed, network interface cards can change, they could be on different VLANs and subnets internally. The EA is responsible for discovering and managing and maintaining all of that. So it's got a real-time blueprint that it maintains of that environment. It runs every so often in the environment, not to tax the environment, but enough to get a full picture of what's happening in the environment with respect to the VMs, the virtual switches, the port groups, the data stores, where the data lives, etc. Right? So it has that. Now, once it discovers the VMs, it sends the metadata, ships it off securely off into the Pure One managed cloud so that now you can go pick and choose VMs from your inventory for DR protection, right? So again, everything is managed through Pure One. So there is no UI at the edge. It's really the management layer, the management plane is all inside Pure One. The second function that the EA is responsible for is to take snapshots of those VMs. And it's going to do that based on some policy. And I'll talk about that in a bit of what those policies are and how you set that up. But let's say as an example, a customer sets up a policy which says protect my VMs once an hour once a day. And so that's a 24-hour RPO recovery point objective. The EA wakes up at a designated time. It goes and takes a snapshot of that VM. And then it starts to read the data from that VM. And it actually stores the data locally in a compressed form in a data store. So I'd mentioned a bit earlier, Alistair, about customer may choose a Synology, or if they have extra capacity from an FA, they can use that and provision that in a data store that's used by that EA for local retention. So typically what we see is customers saying, okay, I want a shallow DR retention on-prem, say 3 days, but on the cloud side, I want a deeper retention, so that I have enough recovery points in case I have a malware event or I want to go back to some point in time. I have a deeper retention, 7 days, 10 days, 30 days, up to the customer to set up. And the EA takes a snapshot, reads the data, and then puts it into what we call a repository on-premise within data stores the customer designates. And we also give the customer some tools, which I'll show you a bit later, to establish a quota of how much storage we are allowed to consume. Because as you know, snapshots can take up some room, and storage admins can get pretty annoyed if with the VM admin, right? If things take up too much room. So we give some tools to set up quotas, which allow you to protect VMs within a certain retention and taking up a certain amount of capacity within the storage. And then as it protects, and as soon as it finishes protecting the VM locally with change block tracking enabled and QSing, as you would expect from a VM-based VADP protocol. So you take an application consistent snapshot, you release that snapshot so that the VM goes back to its happy place doing what it's supposed to do. You do not want to hold onto a snapshot while you're sending data off into the cloud over a wide array network, which is, choppy with high latency, right? So an important aspect here is that EA is responsible for all that, right? So the commands came down from the cloud. The EA is responsible for waking up, discovering the VMs, kicking off protection, reading all the data, starting to replicate that off into the cloud. And that's its main purpose on premise. I'll take a quick pause here. And if anybody has any questions here.
Yes. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Damien.
I'm probably going to steal Chris's question here, but is this crash consistency or app consistency?
It's app consistency, right? So we again, we are integrating with VM tools for any of the QSing capability, right? So we turn a flag on for QSing when we take the snapshot, and if there's a VSS requester and writer inside the app, you get an app consistent snapshot, right? And that we rely on that, and we obviously check the tools versions, etc., and highlight that to the customer because you need that, properly set up in order to be application consistent, especially for databases, which is important, right?
So speaking of databases, are you able to handle multi-writer VMs?
Sorry, say that again, please.
Are you able to handle multi-writer VMs, like when you've got a quorum drive in place and you've got multiple VMs writing to the same drive?
Again, we are snapshotting at the individual VM level, right? And so we don't, so if you, for example, map RDM drives, when we can't take a snapshot, right? So it has to be at the VMDK level, sitting in VMFS for the snapshot.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the bottom half of the picture, right? So that EA is responsible for all of those functions. And in the right-hand side, I talked about that 10 to 15 minute process to set up that whole environment, right? And that happened already in this picture, at least. It's there, ready to use. And one of the aspects of that, one of the things that happen when the cloud is set up is that we actually bring up a peer EA or an edge appliance in the form of an EC2 instance inside AWS, inside that VPC, inside a specific subnet designated for management, right? And there's a lot to talk about here. So probably need another vBrownBag for that, but let's at least dig in at the first layer, right? One aspect of it is that why do we need that second EA on the cloud side? It is a compute element that runs there all the time. It's an important element that needs to run there all the time. The primary reason being this is a DR system. If your on-premise environment in VMware crashes, is unavailable, your EA on-premise is unavailable, the cloud is a witness, and so our Pure and Manage will still have the ability to reach down to the edge, to the EA running inside AWS, inside the VPC, and execute commands, specifically around failover.
I think this hit something that I had not understood at the first explanation, is that CloudFormation template, the CFT, is used to deploy the infrastructure for recovery at setup time. So this is why we see in the diagram that VPN between the two edge appliances that they are working as peers together.
That's right.
I may have missed when you said that was done at setup time, not just at recovery time.
Yeah. So, and that's a great, thanks for mentioning that, Alistair. I'll talk about that a little bit, right? Now, when you finish the setup, like I said, 30 minutes or less, the two EAs, one on-premise and one in the cloud, establish internal VPN connection on a tunnel interface internally, and they start to exchange metadata. And the reason is that we actually, read all the VM information on premise, and the software actually starts to do some interesting things for you, which are useful. And I'll show you this when I walk through the demo a little bit. But the idea is that, let's say out of 100 VMs, a customer picked 50 VMs to protect allow the product to manage for DR protection. The VMs are going to have a different set of resources from a point of view of CPU, memory, IO latency, etc. Well, what we actually do in the software is that Pure Protect as a software, it reads in all of AWS's published information around instance types, instance costs, and all of that, and automatically map VMs from VMware into EC2 instances in AWS.
Oh, that's slick.
Yeah. So, and the reason that we do that is a twofold. One is, and I didn't bring this up earlier, but I'm going to bring it up now. We are a native AWS product. No VMware licenses on the cloud side, right? Especially with the whole Broadcom VMware deal. This is fully native in Amazon. We are taking VMs, type 2 hypervisor, VMware environment, converting them into HVM VMs on the cloud side or paravirtual VMs, right? With the driver injection and a bunch of other things we can talk about in detail. But the idea is that we are native. Second is that AWS or any cloud provider, including Azure, etc., have 1,000 different variations of instance types. Which one do you pick? How do you pick it, etc.? Right? Pretty complicated. Should I use a compute, focused instance class? Should I use a, memory optimized? What am I actually using, right? So we actually read for every single region globally in AWS. We create a map of all of the different instance classes available in that region. And then we synthesize that information along with the VMs for protection on premise, and we create essentially the mapping logic to decide how should an instance or a VM be protecting on premise when we try to recover that for either for test or for failover. How do we want to bring that up? How do we want to spin that up? And we have some pretty cool features, around that. So that's that's one of the things that we do. The second important thing to realize about the cloud side, besides it being native and this kind of mapping function, is that architecturally, and before I talk about the architecturally piece, let me talk about the reasoning. If you took a step back and looked at really what the cloud offers you, it's a pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-use system, right? Now, if you think about it, for disaster recovery, wouldn't that be fantastic, right? To have a pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-use utility-based system. The challenge, like I said, has been the complexity and figuring out how to get it done. And that's why we as a product are saying, we don't want this to be a project, we want to make it a product. And so for us, the idea here is that architecturally, now I can talk about that, the way we're doing this is that you do not need any compute for the VMs that you protect until the time that you run a test or when you actually do a recovery. Those are the two real events, right? If you want to actually test that your 100 VMs that you are protecting are recoverable from a specific recovery point, that's when you actually want the compute spend in the cloud, right? If there's an actual live DR event, that's when you want the compute spend in the cloud. When none of those events happen, why should you be spending compute in the cloud, right? You really should, it's pointless. Right? You could obviously, use the system for things like, QA, dev test, and other type of automation that you may want to do. And some customers may choose to do that, which is great. But really, the whole idea here is cost optimization. That is a pillar for us in Pure Protect. It's a pillar today. It's a pillar when we designed it. It's going to be a pillar, 10 years from now or whatever, right? Because the important aspect here to take away for folks listening here is that this is a cloud optimized product day zero, right? And that's going to be very important for customers, because now they can get a product which is solving a DR problem for them using an pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-use system, which has been optimized for cost upfront, right? So they don't have to do the scratching their head trying to think about how you achieve that. It's built into the product, and there are a bunch of different capabilities around that we have built. So one of them being, how do we replicate and how do we store the data, right? So the important aspect here is that I talked about replication from west to east, from the on-prem side to the cloud. Now we use S3 as a transitory location for the data, right? It's a very important term to say it's transitory, because we are replicating data. We are taking up, we took a snapshot. We are reading the blocks. We are writing it locally. We asynchronously start to replicate the data. We chunk it up into small objects. It sits inside S3. And the EA on the cloud side at some point wakes up and says, okay, is there any data for me to process on the cloud side? From S3, so was there some protection that took place across VMs, across groups? Do I need to process that? The EA in the cloud side then wakes up and says, yes, there is. And it goes into S3 and then pulls all that data down. And at that time, it provisions some storage. Again, a term we use is the repository, which are composed of a bunch of EBS volumes. And it's provisioned on demand at that time. It's not pre-provisioned, it's not just sitting around, it's dynamically provisioned. And then we read all the data from S3 back into block, right? Into an LVM-based file system, and we lay it all there. And it's a raw disk that's sitting there with compression, et cetera, built in. And then once we finish that, we actually take a snapshot of all those EBS volumes and delete all the volumes. So the resting state for the actual data is in the form of EBS snapshots. Why would we do that? I go back to the cost optimization piece. Now, EBS volumes, customers pay for the entire logical size of the volume. You fire up a single EBS volume, which is a terabyte in size, whether you use it or not, you're paying for all 1 terabyte of it. With EBS snapshots, you only pay for what you use within that storage. So out of a terabyte, if you only use a gig, you only pay for a gig, right? You don't pay for the full logical size. So our resting point part for the data, the golden copy of the data, is in the form of EBS snapshots. The other nice thing to have with the EBS snapshots is 11.9 available. Fantastic. You're not losing anything, right? And you can replicate snapshots to other regions, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of nice benefits to it, but cost is a critical aspect for it. And so, again, the customer doesn't need to worry about this. I mentioned at the outset in the slide that this is an orchestrated DR product, and this is just highlighting some of that orchestration. A lot of
the things I wanted to hit in there with you is naming for things. So the 11.9s is durability, not availability.
That's right.
It's 4 nines of availability.
Yep, that's correct.
But as this conversion is happening, so as we're getting each of the protection points is coming through onto S3, is then we're standing up a volume, an EBS volume for that protection. Now that EBS volume, we get charged for the maximum provision volume size per month.
Yes.
Presumably we're doing this sequentially, doing this one protected VM at a time so that we don't have that concurrent increase in maximum provision size. This is
good
part of
question.
that cost optimization.
Yeah. So the way we treat EBS volumes are as a pool of storage, and we actually fire up a few EBS volumes, 6 currently to start with, and we create a pool. And that pool is the landing spot for all the VMs that we protect for all the data. Right? Why would we do that, right? So EBS volumes today have limitations themselves, right? You could have EBS volume if it is a GP2 or GP3, 16 terabytes in size, IO2, et cetera, 64 TB, right? Per volume. So we create a pool and we drop an LVM on top of that so that we can now treat that as a pool, and we can grow each volume independently from a scale point of view, and we can also grow it horizontally by adding more volumes, right? Which become devices under the LVM. So for us, it's really EBS volumes are capacity where we can pool, storage over time, which we can dynamically and elastically change and increase, again, so that you don't have to pre-provision, like a petabyte, right? You can kind of slowly grow as the VM count grows, as the data grows, as the snapshot size grows, et cetera, right? And so that's important. The other point that you mentioned, Alistair, which we should highlight, is that exactly like you said, the way they charge for EBS is on the, Amazon has nice, lovely long terms for how they, charge for on the hour and the minute and the month, et cetera. So they have a way that they charge for EBS volume. So you can actually save some dollars if you only provision those volumes for a certain duration of time, right? So you don't have to keep them around forever. So the way our system works is to say, like I said, the EA is smart enough to figure out, okay, a few hundred VMs got protected, whatever that is. It understands how much data that those protections through incrementals, et cetera, took from a size point of view. So it can provision those volumes, read the data out of S3, push it down into the volumes, and then take a snapshot and then release the volumes. And now you get charged or billed only for that duration of time because it's a volume month charge from EBS, right? And that's important. Now the EBS snapshot, on the other hand, is persistent snapshot. So you charge for that. But like I said, you're paying for only the amount of compressed storage on that rather than paying for like a volume. And again, it's not the case that for every single VM disk, we create another EBS volume. No, right? It's a pool of storage that we can elastically grow, and all the data lands on that. As you can imagine, with compression, with referential blocks, etc., you can really get that storage down to a reasonable size, right? Based on what you're trying to protect and the number of retention points you want to maintain.
And the reason we're adding this complexity in here rather than just leaving all that data on S3, which is essentially the same cost basis for these snapshots, is that this methodology gives us a much faster recovery time. That these EBS volumes, we can do AWS will do a lazy loading mechanism when you restore out of this that you couldn't do if you were designed if your data remained on S3.
Right. Yeah. And object storage or blob storage has never been meant, to be as thought of as a file system.
It isn't transactional.
It's horrible, and people have tried and failed miserably using Fuse and other backends to be able to do that. But there's no real, logical reason to use that way, because that is not what it's meant for, right? And in fact, products today that use S3 as a backend typically use it for backup, so that you have an offsite backup of something that you can then recover back on premise. It's really never meant to be served up as a file system, right? So yeah, exactly.
Hey Suresh, is there a specific size of customer that you would consider the sweet spot?
Excellent question. Yeah. So if I told you that this product is for every single customer of every single size, you'll start laughing at me. So I'm not going to say that.
Well, I'd say you're in marketing.
But that's Lance's job.
That's my job.
Let's and this is the reality of it, right? And I want to be fully transparent with everybody here, which is that we released our product in October. And really, our sweet spot for our current customers are on the commercial side, the mid-market, SMB-ish, but more on the slightly larger side, but on the mid-market size customer, commercial SLED. We are, a few on the smaller SME side. Customers are interested in what we're doing. So that's kind of the class of customer. Now that's what the customer profile is. Now let's look at what the environments are. In general, the kind of environments which we are looking for currently are typically in the size where they have maybe 300-400 VMs under management overall. So maybe at a 40%, 25 to 40% of the applications that they want to protect. 150 VMs under DR protection, around 100 terabytes under DR protection management. That's the profile of customer that we are targeting this for right now. And just to add to that, Damien, one of the areas for us are, for a lot of customers, right? AWS is something of a heavy lift, right? And so in this class of customer who may not necessarily have that, I would say, the knowledge base, the engineering team capacity to be able to learn and know on everything else about AWS, this model fits great for them, right? Because they don't have to worry about it. They may have their certifications in Microsoft and VMware, but not AWS yet. But they can still start to consume this as a product for disaster recovery. Now, the larger enterprises and folks who have large teams around, business continuity and everything else, are spending a lot of dollars for it. We are not currently, focused on them right now. We're having conversations, obviously, because Pure does have those type of customers. But currently, we believe there are more capabilities that they will need, and we already have a roadmap towards that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
This also could suit a tactical use by a department within a large enterprise organization that also has that same profile. Yeah. It's not that it'd never be seen in a large enterprise organization. It's just that you're not targeting across the entire organization. We definitely see DR as a service being used by BUs that have a specific requirement, maybe just a single application being protected this way.
Yeah, and also, while we are positioning this specifically around disaster recovery as service and cyber resiliency, some customers are interested also in the level of automation that we have provided for all this cost optimization in the cloud, so they can actually take applications, take a snapshot, and bring it up in the cloud, and then they can use it for dev test, patch management, etc. Right? That's an adjacent use case, but people do that. The other fantastic advantage this offers specifically on cyber resiliency is now the customer has the ability to be able to test every single snapshot in an isolated environment in the cloud and contain the costs. They don't have to go build off a DMZ in their local environment, or worry about other additional capacity that they are using just for testing, etc. This gives a very like a functional, cost-effective deployment model where they can test the resiliency of any single snapshot, right? I mean, that's pretty powerful, right? Especially in this day and age when we're talking about malware and ransomware. So all of these, I think, are coming to bear, especially in this kind of model. So Damien, those are the other use cases where customers are looking at this as an advantage.
And we better let Suresh get moving because he has some demos, and I really want us to have some demos.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump right into that then, in that case, because I didn't really have too many other slides. I think I've captured exactly, how this is all set up, how data moves from point A to point B, etc. So I'll skip right to some demos. That was next anyway. We're good. Yes, perfect.
This is my favorite part.
Yes.
All right. Good. So let's jump right in here. So and I'll try to zoom in and out for you folks. Doesn't matter for anybody listening in, but the idea here is that I mentioned at the outset it's managed through Pure One. So once you log in and you have if anybody has once they given access to a Pure One, what they call an organization, in the dashboard can go to a marketplace, and then they have all products in a catalog inside Pure One, and they'll see a tile for Pure Protect. And when they click on the tile, they can go and get a subscription. That's how Pure works for everything else, including the storage today, and that's exactly how it works for customers for Pure Protect as well. I'd mentioned it's based on terabytes, and so we have both a reserved pricing as well as an on-demand rate. As you can imagine, the idea being that you can reserve a certain amount of capacity, but then if you you're adding VMs and you go over that, then we charge based on an on-demand rate over that reserved pricing, right? And so we have both those terms there.
So the reserved pricing is you're making a commitment for a period of time, and if you don't use it, you're still paying that committed amount.
That's correct.
On-demand is you pay only for what you actually use.
Exactly. So you can imagine, like, let's say a customer has 50 terabytes and a 3-year contract at $50 a TIB, it's like $30K per year. And that's like a reserve pricing. Right now, if they use beyond that 50 TIBs as they're protecting more and more VMs, then after that point from 50 TIBs up on, the difference is where you're going to pay the on-demand rate, right? It's not like you suddenly flip over to the on-demand rate. And that's, again, pretty standard with all the other subscription services with EG1 and others that Pure offers.
So is this normalized across different availability zones, the pricing?
This pricing is really for just our subscription, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so the AWS bill is a line item that the customer sees from AWS directly, right? So we don't, that's transparent pricing, and we don't intermediate that in any way.
Right, because they're bringing their own account.
Exactly. That's right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. So let's talk about the concepts in the product. Pretty straightforward. I'll talk about it. So once you have that subscription, you get a license key sent over to you. You download the OVA and you punch in that license key inside it. It activates the product, and then once it activates the product and you come back to Pure One, you can actually see it in your in the browser in Pure One Manage. The screen that I'm showing you is like a system view right now. It kind of shows you your deployment. In this case, I have multiple deployments. Let me just talk about the concept of deployment, right? A deployment is tied to a specific set of sites, right? And the idea here is that in this case for Pure Protect, you have two sites, one being VMware and another being AWS. And this one deployment manages that entire set of sites. And you can have as many deployments as you want. And so, as an example, one customer, you may have a deployment for just say your dev test or staging, another one for prod, however you like to slice and dice that, you can do that. But each of these deployments are self-contained. And once you're in a specific deployment, you have three main concepts in the product. The first concept is really business policies. The second concept are application groups, and the third one are recovery plans, right? And let's talk about each one and what they mean. So business policies are really all around SLAs, around the backup frequency and RPO, the amount of retention that you want to maintain both on-premise and in the cloud, as well as your estimated RTO. How quickly do you want to recover, right? These are your business policies. You out of the box, we created 2 of them, gold and silver. You are free to go construct, as many policies as you like, which suit your environment, right? And when you create a policy, you can essentially go in here and set up all of those type of things, including the frequency of protection, both from an hourly point of view and a daily point of view. So as currently in the 1.0 release, we have a 4-hour minimum from an RPO point of view, so you get 6 protections a day. But again, these are things that will be improving over the course of the product. As you can imagine, it also depends on the network availability on the customer's edge, because we use the wide area link to replicate. And protection from our point of view is we're getting the data off to the environment and into S3, and then it's completely done. That's what we call a protection. So that's what business policies are. And like I said, you can create ad hoc ones, whatever you like, and you can assign them to groups. So groups, really, I mentioned application groups. And when we mean application, they are sets of VMs, but it's again up to the user to construct however they want application groups. We have a special group out of the box called the infrastructure group. This is the group where you drop in domain controllers, you drop in any infrastructure VMs, DNS, DHCP servers, anything that you want up and going ahead of time prior to bringing up your application, right? So we can protect and replicate your DC to the cloud. You can fail it over into AWS natively, and our software will automatically map the domain and tie up the applications, together with each other on the cloud side. So one of the things I didn't talk about a bit, but I will talk about right now, is that when we fire up the cloud environment, the one main question besides the region where you want to deploy, we ask is what's the network that you want in the cloud side for your VPC, right? So you can imagine a customer has a bunch of different networks on-prem. As an example, let's say they have a 1010 to a 1030 range for subnets on-premise. They can designate like a 1040 range on the cloud side. Now that becomes your DR network, right? So all failover happens into that network. Our software is responsible for doing all the mapping of subnet to subnet, IP to IP. So we designate the cloud VPC and segregate the cloud VPC into 2 distinct network groups. So as an example, if I said that the cloud network is 1040.00/16, a class B CIDR, I would split that up into 2 halves on a /17 and have a set of IP addresses specifically for production failover and other sets specifically for test. So the reason you want to do that up front is because customers have policies, they have a DNS, and other areas where they want to set up what the IP ranges need to be ahead of an event. You don't want the IP addresses changing, protection to protection or failover to failover, right? You want them statically configured for your applications, because typically that's how they are on premise. But like I said, our software has discovery. So if your VMs on premise did move from one subnet to another on a different VLAN, our software will automatically react to that event, and we will map that to a different subnet on the cloud side so that we can fail over that VM into a separate subnet. So all those are again done automatically on behalf of the customer. Now, does that solve all subnetting and networking issues for customers? The answer is no. But this is the way we look at this, is that this is the current set of topologies that we set up in the product to keep it simple for the user. But we are looking at multiple topologies for more complex networking setups that customers do have as we scale up the market. So again, this is our application groups. They can designate these groups however they like. Let's say that they want to create a brand new group. They can provide a group name, select the VMs that they want to add into the group, pick the policy that they create prior, from the business policies. They can pick a policy which tells them what the RPO, RTO retention needs to be. And then they set up a couple of important aspects here in the group setting. And this is on a per group basis. So let's say that the customer picked 10 VMs, they added to a group. They say, okay, I want this group to start at a certain time. After business hours, for example, is when they want the protection interval to start, right? So as an example here, I said 5:30 p.m. Every day, once a day, go ahead and start protections for disaster recovery, right? So the idea being at that point in time, the system will wake up, the edge EA will be able to take the snapshot, replicate the data, et cetera, to the cloud side. Another important aspect of the capability that we offer is how quickly do you want to really recover that VM? In the policy, we had this idea of an estimated RTO, but the group setting actually gives you the flexibility to decide that. Again, the idea here is that sometimes you want applications that you want to have come up quickly, say within 5 to 10 minute range. And that's what our product supports today, is that if you want really fast recovery for VMs, the SLA for RTO, the fastest you can get is around 5 to 10 minutes per application, and you can do that at scale. Now, if you did not choose pre-conversion, which is the term that we use for this fast recovery, then you would fall back to normal recovery, which takes about an hour and a half for a standard size VM in the 200 to 300 gig range, right? So that's the RTO for a standard size VM. Now, why would you do that? Now, there's a cost benefit here. The idea here is that if you are willing to pay a few extra dollars for a faster recovery, you could choose a pre-conversion mode so that you could have those applications up quickly. And what our software does in the backend is that after protection is done, we execute a process that converts the actual protected data into an actual AMI in EC2, right? So it's available as a template. So when you actually kick a failover, you go from template to EC2 instance directly. If, on the other hand, you didn't choose pre-conversion, we had stored that in our repository or pool of storage on the cloud side, and we actually fire the execution out of that storage. So it takes a bit more time to get that all the way into a native EC2 instance, because we're doing a bunch of functionality in the backend in order to make that happen. And so
differentiating here, the default option of not recovering with the pre-conversion, that's using the snapshot restore methodology we talked about before, where there is that process of read out of S3 and then generate into a snapshot.
No, yeah. So I'll explain that. So the snapshot portion was already done in the background, right? That's something that's separate from this the actual failover process. And so the distinction here is that we took stuff out of S3 and put it into EBS snapshot, and that is a function that happened in the background. And let's say that you just finished a protection, right? And at that point, right after you finish protection, you kick off a failover. The same process wakes up and says, oh, guess what? There's some data sitting in S3 and they wanted to recover from the latest point. Therefore, it's going to read the data from S3 at that point in time, put it on the EBS volumes, provisioned volumes, and then fire off the failover. But if you hadn't kicked off a failover, there's a background process that's consuming stuff from S3 and putting it into EBS snapshot. So you could, and so in that case, if you were recovering from a different point in time, right, from somewhere else, prior, that data could already have been processed from S3 into EBS snapshots, right? So you have reduced your RTO there as well, right? Because you don't have to do that additional step of pulling the data. So again, the idea here is that if data needs to be processed now because there's something new available for us to process, we'll go ahead and process it. But otherwise, the assumption here is it's already been processed because it's a background task taking care of that routinely.
So I'm still not clear what turning this setting on is, because you talked about it being an AMI. So is that snapshot then gets converted into an AMI if I choose this, or pre-converted in that sort of time process? So it's another conversion process up front to again shorten that recovery time.
Yeah. So I'll explain that. So if you set pre-conversion and you add VMs and you say and you want to protect them, you can even do like a on-demand protection. It'll copy the data all the way into S3, and then from S3, it will actually copy it into an AMI. We have a process that creates an AMI, and that's the end of the process. So from a RPO point of view, it looked like a longer RPO because we have finished all the way to conversion into an AMI, right? And that would happen if you set the pre-conversion to true. Now, if pre-conversion was false, we would still do all the replication and put it in Amazon S3, and then at that point we would stop and we'll be, you're done, you're protected. Because you are protected because the data is in S3, but from going from S3 all the way into an EC2 instance is still a process, and that there are some background tasks which take care of that, of processing the data like I'd explained from S3 into EBS snapshots in the backend, and that is happening, and that is not part of the pre-conversion flow, right? So takeaway is pre-conversion gets you an AMI, not pre-conversion does not get you an AMI, right? And so
gets you an EBS snapshot, or if there's newer data,
that's right. Exactly. So again, the purpose of this is to give the customer flexibility of faster recovery versus faster protection, and there's a line there, and that both come with a cost in time and also cost in storage and capacity, right? And that's the difference. And then the last point here are recovery plans. And the idea here is, again, this is focused on recovery. So you can create any ad hoc plans. We have one, again, that comes out of the box called the production recovery plan, where every VM that you add to a group, and that entire group gets automatically populated into a production recovery plan. So you have one single button to go kick off a production failover, right? But at the same time, you can go create any ad hoc recovery plans and add any set of groups into them. It can be all or nothing. It can be one single group that you just want to test one application at a time, things like that. And then when you actually want to go and an interesting feature in this in the recovery plan is that when you select the groups that you want to recover, you can also set a scaling factor, which basically say that, hey, you know what? I actually want to scale down my test. I don't want to spend the money for the resources on compute on the cloud side. So go ahead and scale it down for me when I run a test. So what that will allow our software to do, like I mentioned, is that we have all the formulas, we know all the instance types, etc. We have already mapped or designated a specific instance class for that VM for failover. And so we know based on the setting in real time, what instance class do we then switch to, right? So they say they want to reduce by 50%. A simple example would be 8 gig, 8 vCPU on-prem goes to a 4 vCPU, 4 gig. But then we will look at the instance classes, we look at the cost bases, and then decide which instance class to fire off from, right? And again, if the customer chooses after the fact to go in and change that in Amazon EC2, they're welcome to do it. It's their account, right? We don't do anything there. But at the outset, we offer this right inside in the product, so they can actually scale down resources, especially when they're doing a test. And like I mentioned, you want to test often, right? This is a fully non-disruptive test. It happens completely inside the customer's cloud environment with no impact at all to production. So they can, in fact, run this at any point in time. And the software is the one taking care of the cost optimization part again during a test failover, so that it keeps the bill reduced for the customer.
Can that resizing be configured separately for test versus failover? Because I don't want to accidentally do a production failover and only have half the resources I had, but I definitely want to reduce the resources for test.
That's right. I mean, in this version that I have, that's not the case, but that is the case in upcoming release, which is that you can in fact even scale up production if you want. Some customers would choose to say, give me more capacity from a IO perspective on the cloud side, and they can choose to do that for prod. Right. And so
I'm scared of noisy neighbor issues in AWS that I don't have on premises.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I wanted to also highlight how new this product is, because quite a lot of the way through, you've been talking about what the future is in this product, right? This shipped in October 2023.
Yes.
And so at this point, it's less than 6 months old. It's still the first initial release. So we can see a long way further in what might be done with this, but it's pretty cool so far.
Yeah. Awesome. So again, these are the three concepts, right, around how a customer will set up a business policy, how they can look at VMs and create protection groups for that, and how they actually execute the product and the functions for recovery. And I know we are maybe a bit tied up for time, and I'll talk about that right now. Is that the life cycle for DR includes failback. Let's not forget, right? Is that you're not, this is not a migration product. I want to be very clear. And the point is that you can bring it up in the cloud. While you're in the cloud, our software is smart enough to figure out that, okay, now that is your production copy of your VM. So we're going to actually protect that VM in the cloud side, because that's where you're doing work. And we, in the background, take snapshots of those EC2 instances where you're doing work. And then you can recover them in the current iteration of the product, failback is based on OVA-based failback, right? So when you say you want to fail back, you can pick and choose VMs, and it'll generate a list of OVAs for you for each of those VMs that that'll be available for you in this in a list, so that you can download and deploy to any site. Now, again, don't want to talk too much about features, but obviously this is not the most efficient manner to generate it for failback, and we already know that, and we're already working on it. So I'll say that much.
When you create an application group, like you for prod and those things, when you create a new one and spin that up, does that create a new security group? And do you have to redeploy your CFT to get the new stuff on the AWS side?
No, not at all. The CFT was purely for deployment, for the setup of all the infrastructure. Now, what we're actually doing from a security group subnet point of view is at the time of failover, we are actually dynamically going and creating a subnet before we land the EC2 instances into the subnet.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So if you said you wanted to do a test and you happen to be, mapped into a, 1040.128/0/24 network as class C, at that time in live, we are actually going to create that subnet dynamically and then land the EC2 instance in there and then create a security group policy around it. Right. And so again, because guess what, the VM could have moved on premise somewhere else. Right. So we want to be able to match that. In the background is where we are doing all the mapping, right, to make sure that subnet to subnet, these VMs are going to land in the right spot. And let's be clear, right? This is a flat network, because in a single VPC, you can have subnets, but not the same as the VLAN. It's completely different, right? So what we're doing in this first iteration is really providing a topology which flattens your network, but then gives you the subnetting capability so that application groups with security policies are within those boundaries, right? And then if you wanted after the fact to go in and then change those policies for changing your ingress, rules of who gets to talk to what, you can do that, right? But at the first level, that's kind of how we map it. We flat map it into the VPC, into subnets.
Gotcha. Thanks.
And just going to highlight, and obviously we have some monitoring and reporting capabilities, which, where you can at any point in time see exactly what's happening for any of your protections or recoveries and all the steps and the amount of time it takes for each of those phases, right? So that's just out of the box. You have that capability. And again, we do generate some reports which are interesting. It depends on what are the kind of things that a customer is typically looking for. And in general, it's really focused on RPO and RTO, right? Here's an SLA I had for protection. Did my protection events meet that SLA or not? Here my these are my recovery SLAs. Did I actually meet those or not, right? And it actually splits that up, and it gives you a higher level, map of exactly what's happening at each phase, and whether you're meeting those SLAs or not on a per VM basis. So you have granularity on that as well. And there are some pretty interesting things we plan to do around that as we move forward. It's right. Are we at time here?
I think it's a good time to bring it home.
All right, great. So that's kind of the end to end. We talked about the demo. Hopefully this gives you the insight into exactly what the product is, how it's set up, what are the key the terms and terminology, right, around how a customer would set up and use the product, and the capabilities that we have out of the box right now.
That's because Suresh and you, Lance, understood the audience here that likes to hear from the engineering side.
We did.
Suresh, Lance, thank you for coming on. Wonderful having you. Very insightful. Thanks very much for coming by. And folks, we will see you next time on vBrownBag.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.